So, and now that we are shifting our way out of a isolationist mode, a lot of these schools are still continuing on with this experiment. So we have schools that are deciding, like, well, let's look at these groups of people that we've let in, right, for the pandemic, and then the groups that come after them, and see what happens. They're discovering lots of things. First of all, they're discovering that when it comes to the moment that they got rid of, like, the requirement for the test scores, they figured out that many students were self-rejecting, right? They got I think it was a Cornell University. They went from 50,000 typical applications per year to 71,000 the year that they dropped the application. Meaning, right, that people thought that I shouldn't even bother, right? Just like my scores aren't good enough, I'm not even gonna submit it.
I see that every year.
Yeah. So and Cornell reports that, like, the scores aren't determinative, right? Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I actually don't know. And it's hard to know if that's true for all the other schools, right? Where SAT scores were determinative. It always felt like, culturally at least, it felt like they were determinative. Like in the zeitgeist, it always felt like they were determinative, but maybe not. But in any case, people weren't even bothering. That I'm reading an article, and it's talking about this girl who said, like, she got good grades otherwise in high school. She was, a good student. But she took the SAT, and the scores she got were disappointing. And she had, like, a whole list of colleges that she was going to apply to, and she started, like, editing it down. It's like, well, I'm not going to be able to get into any of these things. Because the SAT because a counselor told her that the SAT was optional, right? Those scores are optional. She ended up sending her application to all those top universities, and got into many of them. Got into a lot of those, right? Now, I think the better question is, well, I mean, is it racist? But, like, is it actually determinative? Like, does the SAT actually tell us much about a student? I think that the SAT, at least parts of it, are complete crap, right? Like, was it like, it's not analogies, or the word association part? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's the part I did the best on.
A is to B as C is to D. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Those are analogies. You're right.
Analogies.
You said it right.
Okay, great. Yeah. I didn't want to say something dumb and then, like, okay, he did bad at the SAT.
Nope, you're right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I've taught SAT many times.
Yeah. There's a list of, like, the famous SAT words, right? And people people kind of use that almost as an insult. Hey, you're using an SAT word now.
Right.
And what that means is you're using a word that we don't actually use in common English, that exists in the English language, but is not actually useful. You won't encounter it unless you're in very specific circles. People of color tend not to be in those very specific circles. And they tend not to encounter these things. Does that say anything about their performance in college, right? Like, that you don't know these random words that we don't use when we're talking to each other. Random words that that don't come up in streams. They barely come up in even, like, political news channels, right? Like, they're like nothing.
What they do come up in, where they do come up in, is in a lot of literature and other things. So while you're right in certain degrees, it doesn't fucking matter. In other degrees, it absolutely does. It does come up in things like literature.
So they can use a fucking dictionary then. If it comes up there, they can use a fucking dictionary. That's it. Dictionary.com.
Yeah. Okay. So my answer to the question is, it's an aptitude test, right? It's right there in the name, right? It's the Scholastic Aptitude Test, I think, is what it stands for. And Yes, it is. It's primary. It was originally intended to predict success in college. That if you have a high SAT score, you're more likely to have high success in college. But there's something that predicts success way more, and that's your grades. And it's because of this. No, very few people get good grades because they're smarter than people who have low grades. In fact, grades measure something entirely different than SAT. SAT really does measure aptitude. You can get very high SAT scores, but be a lazy student and get like straight C's and barely pass. That person is less likely to succeed in college. The person who works really hard all the
Don't call me
time,
out like this.
but may not have a high aptitude, is more likely to succeed in college, because it's really that drive to learn and the willingness to put the work in that allows you to succeed in college. So, and I see this with students all the time teaching AP Lit, and also, in other classes like debate classes and stuff like that. And that is, it's always this, because I always tell them, especially in AP Lit, I tell them in advance, listen, if you guys get together in study groups, you read the material, but then talk to each other about it, your grades will go way, way up in this class. And so the ones that do that are invariably not the smartest kids in the class. Yet they end up getting higher grades at the end of the class, and they get higher AP Lit scores at the end of the class because they're more prepared, not because they have a higher aptitude. So the AP Lit test is going to tell you how prepared they are. The SAT test is going to tell you what their aptitude is. And those two things are very different sort of strategies for testing. And for me, if I'm going to try to predict how successful somebody is in college, I'm going to want to look at their AP Lit scores, not their SAT scores.
So to what point, though, like colleges get thousands and thousands of applications, right? And if you have a limited amount of spots or seats, and you have people with the same grades, right? You need a measure to distinguish and to choose one betwixt the other, and whether that be the SAT or extracurriculars, or I don't see a measure that's quote unquote fair. I just don't. So we got to choose one of these options that's the least unfair. And in my opinion, right, I think it's the standardized test. Now we could say that the standardized tests we have currently are failing us, and that's an absolutely okay thing to look into, and we should. But some way of measuring, right? After we have measured and taken into account preparedness, as I call Rich so aptly described, we need a distinguishing factor. And I would rather that be tests than something like extracurriculars, because extracurriculars, I would argue, are much more based on socioeconomic conditions that you're in, whether you're able to participate in a wide variety of after-school extracurricular activities. But that's just
to correct the record really quick. I didn't mean to imply that the SAT is not a good test. It's testing at something different than than say AP.
I'm going to get more crackers.
I think SAT is actually a pretty good test. I have a higher opinion of it, I think, than Prime does. But I have an even higher opinion of AP Lit and those kinds of tests, and for grades in terms of predictors of success.
Okay, so I'll.
Well, but so Aiko, what do you think the SAT is then? Evaluating or assessing?
It assesses aptitude. If your language skills are higher, if you have a higher vocabulary, if you if your ability to understand logic is higher, then you're going to score higher on SAT, even if you're not a student that tries particularly hard in school. And that might be because you were English was your first language growing up, or your parents. It could be something as simple as your parents listened to NPR on the radio on the way to school every day, or just the general culture that's around the house. If you were read to at an early age, that's a big factor with regards to those kinds of performances.
So most people will say that the SAT and ACT are attempting to assess the likelihood, right? It's used as a predictor of not just how well an applicant is going to do at that particular school, but they're actually going to finish the program or programs that they're enrolling in, right?
Right.
And that's why folks want a combination of high school GPA as well as SAT or ACT scores, because SAT, ACT doesn't get to the person actually showing up for class. It demonstrates acquisition of knowledge, right? Okay, so but here's the thing: when you drop the ACT, SAT, right, as a requirement, what are you left with? You're left with highly subjective forms of assessing students, and these typically take the form of essays and extracurricular activities, of which, I hate using the word, but this is the language that's used, privileged applicants have a huge advantage of, right? They can game the essay, right? They go to high schools where essays are emphasized. They have access to extracurricular activities and parental support for that. And so it has a much different and longer lasting, and I think more problematic effect on lower income and minority students than using standardized test scores or a GPA.
Yeah, we have an interesting phenomenon here in Texas where it used to be 10% that if you're in the top 10% of your graduating class, you were automatically enrolled at the University of Texas, at UT. I think that's, last I heard, that had dropped to 8%, maybe 7% now.
I think that's because they sued over, right? Then isn't that what they have, the one they had the court case over, that university system of just taking the top 10%, and it was like,
yeah. Well, the problem with it is if you go to a school where if you go to like, for instance, if you go to like a school, a low performing school, then it's easier for you to get into the top 10% than it is if you go to a high performing school, like on the other side of town. And so a lot of people said, it's not really fair to students in high performing schools if they're actually performing better than a lot of these students getting automatically admitted to UT. That was one of the problems we had. I worked for some years in a district that was 70% Hispanic. And as a result, because we had so many people who came in with English as their second language, their performance in English specifically were lower than schools like, in very sort of Anglo districts. But I was unusual in that we were in an academy within that district where we taught in a very different way, and our kids were higher performing as a result. And so even within our district, to get top 10% at the school where I was at would be much more difficult than at another school in the district, what we call their home schools. And so what a lot of kids would do is their senior year, they would move back to their home schools so that they could get into the top 10% and get into UT. And of course, you can see, of course, now it's 7%, but principle is the same. So you can see how it's possible to game the system with policies like that. And it's not entirely clear. I don't know how that lawsuit that you're talking about went, Prime. I remember that it happened, but I just don't recall what the result was.
Yeah, I don't remember if someone else knows. Before I get back into it with you guys, and they're all wrong, especially Wick. Then we have a new person here. Drakes, hello, hi, nice to meet you.
Hello, I'm Drakes. Thanks. Hey. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for creating this content.
Yeah, oh, no problem. Thank you for supporting. So Drakes, what do you want to say?
I think it's people have to keep in mind that tests are discriminatory by design. Now, I think it's not good for minorities if there is some kind of discrimination going on that is independent of how hardworking they are. But it's good to find out anyway, so we can help these minorities. Although I don't think it's fair to try it actually out in real life, and this is more of a research question in its own.
What do you mean? What's not fair to try out in real life? What do you mean?
Like having the SAT test, if you don't know why it is racist, or what's the effect that we see this discrepancy between the different groups. I think it's good to understand why they are there. I don't know why they are there, but yeah, I think it's not fair to communities to try it out like this in real life. Instead,
can I give you an example?
An academia research project.
Can I give you an example of just how discriminatory it can be? So When I first started, when I was first assigned to teach SAT, this was some years ago, in that district that I was telling you about, I decided to go and look at how many people got the commendation rate for the PSAT in our school versus other schools. And I went and I looked it up. This is freely available on the websites of all these schools, by the way. I went and I looked and I found out that 80% of people in the elite prep schools in our area, which is there's probably about, I'd say, a dozen of them in the Dallas area. 80% of their students, roughly, give or take about 5 points, got commended on the PSATs. Your average public school, it was less than 2%, and in our school district, it was a fraction of a percent that got commended on the PSATs. And it also, I went and looked at the studies on this, that elite public school or elite private school, like prep school kids, have no higher IQ rate than public school kids. It's the same. So the IQ's not the same, but their PSAT scores were dramatically higher, to the point where 80% of them were getting these commendations.
What's a commendation in terms of the PSAT? I don't even.
It's the top. It's a top certain percent, something like top 4%, or let me look at it. PSAT.
Clearly, I didn't get a commendation. I don't even know what the fuck it is.
You can have a WIC accommodation. The WIC accommodation, Prime. You've earned it tonight.
But so what?
Okay, top 3 to 4%. Sorry, it's the top 3 to 4% get in there. And here's my point: is that not years ago they decided to make every student in every public school take the PSAT, whereas before it was optional. And what the effect that had was it increased the number of people taking that test, so that a far larger number of people could then be in that top 3 to 4% and get commendations. By the way, if you get a commendation on the PSAT, colleges will throw scholarship offers at you before you even apply to them, that's one of the reasons why you want to get a commendation on PSATs. And so the fact is, it was supposed to be for the top 3 or 4% across the board, but that got gobbled up by these prep school kids because their schools are preparing them to take the SAT and the PSAT from middle school on, whereas public school kids typically don't even get told until maybe a week before they take the test. And they certainly don't get any preparation for that test, at least not in any district that I've ever worked in. So that means their scholarships are getting gobbled up by the prep school kids.
So, wait a second. Yeah. Wait, I'm sorry, Aiko. I'm reading something from the National Merit Organization or National Merit Scholarship Program. Yes. It says here more than 2/3, about 34,000 of the approximately 50,000 high scorers on the PSAT receive letters of commendation.
Right.
I mean, this doesn't seem to be a terribly unique thing to be awarded or granted, is it?
Yeah, it is. You have to be in the top. You have to be in the top. It's usually around 3 to 4% of people who take the PSAT score high enough to get accommodations. Way more than 50,000 kids take the PSAT every year.
Yeah.
So I think what they're saying is that maybe they're saying 30 to 50%, or 30 to 50,000, or what get it? I don't know. But
it just looked like more than 2/3 of the high scorers were getting these commendation letters. I think what you're saying is that the high scorers are overly privileged test takers.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that the high scorers typically are the kids who've been prepared to take the PSAT. It's possible to game a lot of the questions on the PSAT, knowing when to guess, knowing when to set aside questions and put them into the end, or knowing what words pop up and getting that vocabulary training, which takes about 3 to 4 years to prepare properly for the vocabulary portion of that test. There's a lot of that happens.
So this is exactly what I'm trying to get at. What the SAT and I'm assuming the ACT, I didn't take, but the SAT is testing for is wealth. Like that's it's wealth and access. You can have a similar IQ and a similar aptitude whatever that actually means in this context. But
right.
Because you didn't get the training, you didn't get the extra help, you didn't specifically, you didn't even know that this was a thing that you should be even concerned about. Then you are then said to be a less than desirable candidate. So, like, that's the problem with one of the issues with the standardized testing. It's testing for wealth, and like you could say, well, it's true that people who score higher on the SAT tend to do better in college. Well, yeah, because they tend to be wealthier. They tend to have that access. All those reasons why they scored well in the SAT, right? The other than their IQ/aptitude, are the reasons why they are more prepared to go to college, right? Like having those support networks. Because you if you're more affluent, you probably have parents who care more about education, who are pushing that forward. You're gonna probably have support networks you can fall back on when you're having trouble. All these things add up to better performance in schools. So why not get rid of that? Why not get rid of that and try for something else? Now, other countries don't have the standardized testing,
Sure,
and they still manage. So, like, why is it? It feels like it's something that people consider integral because it's integral, right?
traditional. It's
Yeah, it's
traditional.
traditionally integral, and so they must. So it must have some legitimacy in of
It's not
itself.
necessary. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's not a necessary thing. Obviously, other countries and other education systems do without it, and they work pretty much just fine. In some cases, even better than the United States for a variety of reasons, not just the fact that they don't have tests, right? But I guess the question I would ask to you is like the measures that they're using, right? Assuming we don't live in a nation which all higher education is just free for everyone. That's a thing that happens, right? But assuming we're living in a situation where there is competition for these, okay, for the competition for these seats, there has to be a metric. There has to be some sort of deciding factor between if 10,000 people want in and you only got 5,000 seats. How do you
They already have that.
differentiate?
No, they already have grades. And,
Yeah, but so many people meet that requirement already. They just do.
but they
right?
and colleges figured it out for their enrollment process. They dropped the test requirement and they still managed to figure it out who to give spots to. I was looking at, I think it was Cornell, who had come up with a new way of scoring each student, right? Because they didn't have the SAT to fall back on. So they came up with a new way of scoring them, like depending on like if you took in more challenging classes. So if you took AP classes or STAR classes, then you would have gotten like weighted scores based on the classes you took and the grades you got in those classes. Right, that's one way of doing things. And I'm sure there are many others. Before I lose this point, and I don't mean to dismiss you, quick, but like before I lose this point, I wanted to say something. I've said this on stream before, but when I went to college, I was a public school kid, and when I went to college, I was underprepared when it came to math. In terms of reading, like I've always literally excelled past all my peers on reading, but when it came to math, I was underprepared. I remember going to a math class and like the teacher was talking about some concept, and I'd never heard of this. I'm like, what is this? And he was just talking about like we should all know about this. Like, what is this thing? And I asked a person next to me about it, and they're like, oh yeah, you remember this, and they like started explaining this concept to me. I'm like, nothing. I no recollection of this. And I did not do well in that class, and then I had to take remedial math classes, and I did well in those remedial math classes. And I remember the day we got back to that concept, I'm like, this is the thing that I didn't know about previously. And then I learned about it, and then I did well at that concept, whatever it was. I can't remember what it was at this point in time. But like, I did well at that. Simply, I just needed to be taught. So like, people are
was it addition?
Was it addition? Yes.
Sorry, I had to take the shot.
3 white men plus 1 cat.
Damn.
I don't.
Well, it's about to be
know.
2 white men because unfortunately I do have to go, but I just want to recommend a pair of books to the listeners.
Hold on, before I gotta let me finish my point before you do that. Anyway, remedial classes helped, and then I complete that the original class, the intro class that I had trouble in. So people are saying, well, what are you going to do with these kids? They're not prepared. Oh, okay, sure. If people are having trouble in certain areas, that's what we have remedial classes, right? You can, and anyone can end up in a remedial class. It doesn't have to be just people who have who've like gone to a public school, right? Like it's anyone who's just having trouble. They might need a remedial class, and so that's what I did. And there's no shame in it. And if we just focused on that, that'd be better. Like, how is that not a better option? Rather than saying that this kid must is certainly going to fail at this college program, rather let's say like let's give them the tools so that they can succeed. Right? You're falling behind in one particular area. Well, don't worry, we can help you out there. Right? If you have the will to succeed, we're going to give you all the tools necessary to do so, rather than saying that these people are just going to fail. That's my issue with it. But go ahead. You want to say something?
Oh yeah,
we got a replacement white man, so you're
good.
To go.
I'm glad that he can try to fill my shoes.
We're cycling through.
Pair of books I would recommend that talk a little bit about this subject, not specifically tests, but the gap in academic performance between groups. They're by a man named John McWhorter. He is a Black linguist professor at Columbia University, and he wrote these concurrently. He wrote a book called Losing the Race and Winning the Race. And if you're interested, I don't agree with all of it, but it's interesting to see that perspective. Check it out. But I gotta go. Thank you, Prime. It's always fun arguing with me. You're still wrong, but it's okay. I still love you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye, buddy. Hey, thank you, Sardis, for the kind raid. 52 people coming through. Thanks for stopping by. If you are new to the channel, we have these conversations all the time. We have individuals who come on. There's an open panel, so you can come on as well. And we argue about stuff right now. We're arguing about standardized testing, whether it's racist. It is racist because I said so. So come on. If you disagree with me or you agree with me, then stop by. We'd love to have you. Exclamation open in chat or our instructions on how to jump onto the panel. We'd love to have you. And yeah, hit that follow button. If you haven't done so yet, hit that follow button. Make sure notifications are on so you know I'm going live. We're here all the goddamn time. Again, thank you, Stardust, for the very kind raid. All right, let's let in our friend Chinchilla, who is back here once again. Chinchilla, a kind mod, a great member of our community. We're always happy to have Chinchilla around. We've missed you, buddy. Haven't seen you in a little bit.
Hello? Okay. I didn't see my mic light up, so I was worried at some point. But yeah, I think it's like overall, you guys had like a super interesting conversation when it comes to standardized testing. We in the Netherlands, we have like a.
You hear that static?
What do I hear?
Yeah. So someone's saying static, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. I think it's either Debateboard or Ico. But yeah. All right. So let's continue on.
Okay, I will just mute myself. Maybe.
No, it's not you. It's not you. It's not you.
Okay. Anyways, it's when it comes to the standardized testing within the Netherlands, it's more like you do have a standardized test. However, your teacher can say like, "Hey, this is not right. This is not how it works whatsoever," right? So because of the fact that I know this kid is way more smarter than it seems that he did on that test. That being said, like a friend of mine, when he was 11, he took like a standardized test, and he ended up going to a school which was basically for mentally disabled people. Well, he was like actually like a really smart kid, but he freaked out with the standardized testing. And that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to have this concept to talk about that and that kind of stuff. Overall, I think you shouldn't have like standardized testing at all? I'm not quite sure. I just think that it would be more appropriate to have like second chances as well when it comes to people that are older and they want to try again or something along those lines. Also, who the fuck is having that static? Oh man!
You can still hear static. I don't hear any static right now.
I still hear it. No, now it's gone somehow.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody's messing up this.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever.
All right. Well,
blame the cat.
Yeah.
By the way, just quickly, is that really your mic, or is that just an animation of a mic and you have a different kind?
Me?
Yeah. It just
That's
looks
not
like a
my
real
mic.
mic. Okay, all right.
Okay, so Prime, I agree with you. I think people underestimate how much grades and success in school is generally just support. But I would ask, like, do we already have the data whether based just on the grades, whether there's going to be less discrimination than with the SAT?
Debate board, try muting yourself. I think the static might be coming from you. Debate board, you there?
He may have stepped away.
Okay, I'm gonna mute him.
No, I was muted.
No, I in Discord. Mute yourself in Discord for that. So I'm sorry, I missed the last thing you said, Drakes. Could you repeat that?
Like whether we already know that grades are going to be less discriminatory because not all groups of people get the same amount of support.
Oh, are you saying that like grades in high school that like that will still be discriminatory because some people don't get support? I think that we aren't going to find a perfect system. I think someone else in chat asked something similar, saying that like what system won't end up benefiting those with more resources, right? The thing about people with more resources is that they are always benefited by everything, right? Like everything is just easier for you. Yeah.
Can I give you an example real quick, Prime?
I think that the resources that you get from your parents are different than that you get from your school. Maybe that I'm a bit biased in that regard because I come from a public school system.
I actually have the perfect
test, right? The problem isn't the test. Then the problem is somewhere before the test, right? So
yes.
if we're going to argue that well-off students are going to do better on these tests, and they actually do better on these tests, well, again, that's not a function of the test. That's a function of something else, right? So we still haven't stuck the pin in the balloon of whether or not standardized tests do a good job of predicting college performance, which we know that they do. ACT, SAT does a really good job of predicting college performance for even minority and poor students.
Debate board, that's an interesting point that you brought up, but I think that when you're talking about all these societal things and that kind of stuff, at some point you want to adjust for those things, right? So when it comes to like a friend of mine, she is like she's Turkish, and she basically she was in middle school, and they said to her when she went to a high school, because we have like different high schools over here, they said like, well, you probably want to go and settle for a lesser high school because of the fact that you have a Turkish background, and you probably cannot keep up because of the fact that there's your language and that kind of stuff. And she's like super smart, and she's like university level now. And at that point it didn't make any sense, and she just got roped into a lower level because of the fact of standardized testing. And I just think that overall addressing these issues when it comes to society, you should do it on a broad level. So you can do it with
chill. I mean, that's
testing.
all fine and well, but you haven't actually identified any issues. I mean, one issue was that perhaps the SAT, ACT is not doing a good job predicting college performance, but that's objectively wrong. So now we want to go back and look at something else that may be causing the variance in performance on these tests. By the way, the College Board here in the United States back in 2019 released, I think they were calling it something where they're calling it the adversity score. And it was a secret quantification of each applicant's childhood environment. So they would take a variety of characteristics, and they would and then assign a score to these characteristics, and then this adversity score then would be used to adjust standardized test scores. And what we found out from that approach is that, well, it didn't work, again, because the College Board's own data again demonstrates that test scores and high school grades predict college performance equally well across all adversity levels. So whatever adversity class you want to evaluate, it still does a effective job of assessing college performance.
Yeah, and that's probably something I would agree with you if I see the stats. I don't know, I don't have the stats on the US whatsoever, so I probably agree with you if I see the stats. But like I'm being charitable in that sense. That being said, within the Netherlands, it's like the opposite way in the sense that they get standardized tests, and then you still have a teacher that decides your fate where you go to school. School,
I don't know where that exists. I don't know where that exists.
That's the Netherlands. That's the Netherlands. So
Netherlands? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You don't want that.
And no, but I'm just saying that they advise you after the standardized test, and that would be the alternative to the standardized test. But yeah, I'm not quite sure if you want to change it then in America, but I'm just saying that overall that there can be like ways to discriminate in the system. But yeah.
Can I give you an example of just what illustrates how stark the difference is? So we talked about that 80% versus a fraction of 1% stat. Here's something else that might sort of shed a light on why some of that variance exists. So I have taught in public schools for a long time, but this year, for the first time, I've sort of got hired away by a company out of California that's starting a new branch in Texas now. And so I'm teaching, I'm still coaching debate, but I'm doing it for a bunch of kids who are doing this sort of as added work in addition to everything that they do at school. And so we had a parent walk in with his kid in class today. And this isn't somebody who would be in my class particularly, but I was talking to him because I was just there at the office. And he had a 5th grade son that he brought in. And he said, well, you know, he's got some issues with confidence. He gets a little bit shy if he's speaking in front of people. And so I would like to have him get the kind of exposure that speech and debate programs can give kids like this, which is, he's absolutely right that they do. And so he's paying us $130 per hour to run him through a speech and debate program that's designed to increase his confidence. Now that's an option that not everyone's going to be able to have, right? Because I'm not whoever the teacher that we assign to that person, you know, will be very specifically focused on him. He won't be one of 30 people, you know, just sort of listening to a lecture about speech and debate, and then maybe once every 2 weeks being expected to give a speech. Like he's going to be giving speeches every day. He's going to be writing them out as if they were essays and memorizing them. We're going to teach him how to walk in a triangle, like, you know, standard speech stuff, but he's getting it at an intense sort of personal level. And that's just something that his father decided that he needed at that age in order for him to like perform well in various settings through school as he goes forward. This is a 5th grade kid. So, I mean, to say that these people are being getting training in advance, prepared in advance to perform well once it comes time to take standardized tests and do a bunch of other stuff. Oh, we have another educator on the coming in, so that's good. So yeah, my point is, if you get all of that very early, of course you're going to perform well once you get to that high school, especially late high school, when you're applying to all these colleges and you're putting forward all the experience that you've had, and it's just not the level of preparation that every kid has access to.
Before we continue, I want to hear what our friend say. Before we continue, what is walking in a triangle?
Oh, sorry. It's just called the speaker's triangle. It's a very simple thing. You're standing on a stage and you're giving a speech, or you're at the front of the room giving a speech, and you sort of walk back. You consider that the front point of the triangle, and then during the speech, at some point, you're going to kind of walk back about 5 steps to another point in the triangle, and then you're going to laterally walk to that other point. Then you're eventually going to walk to that first spot where you were, and you don't necessarily follow that triangle exactly every time, but the point is it trains your body to sort of not stay in one place, but also not walk in an awkward way that's going to sort of like make you walk into the audience or something like that. It's called the speaker's triangle. It's just a really basic speech thing that you learn, probably your very first day in speech class.
I've never heard of this. Do you actually walk backwards? You take steps backwards?
You take steps backwards, laterally, and then forwards. Okay. But you don't, after a while, you stop doing the triangle and you start intuitively, your body sort of intuitively knows how to speak and look natural. But at the very beginning, you want to do it in the triangle because it's one less thing for you to worry about when you're giving the speech. You don't have to think about, okay, where do I go now? Because in your head, you've got this triangle plotted out. And so it's a very, it doesn't take long to learn, but you'd be surprised how long people have to practice it before they can look natural.
Interesting. Very interesting. I never heard of this, but I should try it sometime. Next time I'm giving a speech. Let's go to our friend Joe Lewis. Joe Lewis, thank you for coming through. Joe Lewis is a man we always appreciate having around here, especially on his education takes. He's got some of the deepest education takes I know of. Right. So, friend, please.
No, I just think that it's just kind of what you're looking for. We understand that not every field needs testing in the way that we have it in schools, and some do it better than others. Like some fields do it better than others. I think that entering into more test optional scenarios is going to do universities better. I'm a bit more radical on it. I think we need to do away with testing in public schools altogether, but just doing that in a vacuum isn't enough because, as Aiko brought up, I think we need to approach teaching and learning in a more hands-on model that some fields do it better than others. Like in music, we've already figured that out, where like tests are irrelevant. It's about the practical application of what you do. And I think in a lot of fields, or when I say fields, I mean think like classes that you're in, they can approach a more applicable model to like assess not only student readiness, but also understanding of the material that they're learning.
I'm quite interested in that. So I want to ask you a question, like what would be then the alternative? Like would the fate of the students be in the hand of the teacher, or how are you going to approach that whole thing?
It should be the teacher's job to assess the performance of the student in a practical environment based on material that they're learning. Like, it doesn't matter if you have a bunch of formulas in your head. If you can't apply those formulas as it relates to the class in session, then what are we doing? Like, science figured this out with labs. Like, there was a reason when I went to school, labs were worth 90% of our grade, and the actual lecture was worth 10. Because, like, it doesn't matter how much we learn in the lecture. If we can apply that into the lab, then what's the point of the class?
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. But that being said, like, I had that Turkish friend of mine, and she basically got like because we have like the standardized testing, and after that we have like the teacher that gives advice to which high school you go and that kind of stuff. And that teacher just basically said like, oh, you got to go to a higher level because of the fact that you're Turkish. And so I don't necessarily think that like that, where like I feel you, but then again it's like there might be some implications that the teacher can be like a bad person as well, right?
Well, what are we paying them to do? That's like the first question I think any institution has to figure out. Like, well, actually, the few things they got to figure out. The first thing is what's your goal when they come out of the educational program? Like, in my sake, and like for what I currently doing, like for my students right now, like the job is to get a full 8-minute show on a field. That's the goal. It doesn't matter how well one individual does. If a portion isn't getting the material, then it's a failure of the entire program. So I'm in a very interesting situation because music, again, like we apply it every day. Like it doesn't matter if you learn a scale. Like I can teach my students every single scale and mode that exists, but if they can't apply it in the work that they're doing, then it doesn't matter. They don't know it. They don't actually know it.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
Is it true that I'm sorry, this is the tangent, but I just wanted to ask you as a music teacher, is it true that learning music helps you with math?
It has benefits, and this is like it depends on who you ask. Sadly, I'm of the metric, and what I learned is that it helps with, how do I say this in a way that makes sense? Like abstract problem solving and approaching situations, which has like a correlation with mathematics. I hope my colleagues would be a better individuals to answer, because they specialize, like a few people that I went to school with, they specialize now in those type of like connections. But I know the big selling point that a lot of people do in music is like the idea of like complex problem solving, group participation, which I think are all benefits. But like for math, I'm not the best person to answer that question properly. I would say generally yes, but
okay, I would say that and I wish Shu Gambit was here, because then he would probably agree with me. I would say computer programming gives you all of that, like the exact same thing, like in terms of like abstract problem solving.
Like the myth of
breaking down an issue, a problem you're having, into its basic components, and then like figuring out how to solve it that way, and then also in terms, if you're doing group programming, how to work with others to collaboratively come up with a document. Basically, it's a document that solves all your issues. Like I think computer programming can probably do the same thing. I'm not trying to say this like you shouldn't take music. I'm just saying it's another avenue.
Yeah, the thing that people kind of get really confused about, especially when they try to make like the mathematical arguments, is like they taught the benefits of music as it relates to mathematics, but then when it actually comes to what you have to do, then we're in some gray area, because like a lot of it's tied to performance, and a lot of students aren't performing at the level that they would need to even see the benefit of that. Like when I'm saying performing, it's like at practically playing your instrument. Because some people think that, if we just add a couple theory classes, that's going to correlate to mathematics, and that's just snake oil. In theory, like in music theory, we've known this, but what sucks is that like teachers peddle this idea of like, if we just add these music theory classes, then like that's going to solve it. Like, we know that's cap, but it's still something that's still like even getting sold today. Like I have like colleagues who like unironically believe that.
Okay, so getting back to the topic at hand, I feel that so Joe, would you agree with me that there can't be a system that isn't discriminatory in some way? You can only find systems that are less discriminatory in terms of college entrances, like college entrance requirements.
Well, I mean, like you're gonna like, I think something that a lot of, I guess it's libs, left-leaning individuals, they gotta bite the bullet that the only way that the process is gonna work is through discrimination. Like there's no way you're gonna lead to some environment that's gonna lead to some type of equitable results without some level of discrimination at some level. And like, and I know it's discrimination is like a powerful word for people who just learned how to read yesterday, but it's like in order to make sure, and we've known this in education for a while, where it's like in order for some students to receive the full experience, you're going to have to treat them differently than others, and that is at its core discrimination. Now, we can say like, okay, at what point do we like adjust when that student or individuals are at a certain pace or what we're looking for? But there's going to be some level of discrimination down the line, which is going to alienate certain groups of people. But again, like what's the goal that you're trying to do with the with whatever educational facility that you're in. That's the biggest thing for me.
Can I respond?
Oh, okay. Chinchilla, you go, and then I wanted to bring in Debate on that point.
Yeah, sure. I thought Joe Lewis made like a fair point. I think that as a lib, like I would 100% like own the whole thing, the premise of like, yeah, you gotta make like some discriminations at some point. But I think that what we implemented in the Netherlands, and I'm from a political party that is like the second biggest, largest political party within the Netherlands, and I used to be a politician there. And it's like I always said, like living your life is always learning, and they adopted that slogan in the party at some point, and they still haven't credited me for that one. So fuck those guys. No, just kidding. But it's basically like I think that even if you say like discrimination and that kind of stuff, I think it's very important to have like second chances when you get like older, to have the opportunity to get like some sort of like education at that sort of point, because of the fact that what you said, like Joe Lewis, is like you need to make a discrimination at some point, but later in life you shouldn't be able to not try again. I think that is a lot of Western, like and even like worldwide. I think that's the issue, that we don't have like second chances when we are like 35 or like 40 or something like that. I think that's a major issue within in the world. But yeah, that's my point. Sorry.
Well, I mean, there's something to that, and maybe like Aiko probably knows the door that I'm knocking at here too, is that like education is ongoing. I think one of the biggest lies that we sort of tell students, and this is true in whatever field you're in, whether it be public, private, university, is that there's like a point where it stops, and then like once you're at that stop point, then you can just go off into the world, and that's not necessarily the case. And it's unfortunate because we see the consequences of a system that doesn't prioritize the continuation of learning out when you're away from it. And then like you get students who are put in this like weird situations. And even in like even in the debate sphere, we see that, where it's like you get so many people like within this space who are quick to call out like an ad hominem or a straw man, but it's like, okay, what's like the fallacy of sunken costs? What's the appeal to pity? What's it called? Like hasty like what exactly is a hasty generalization? Like, and then like you'll get people go like, what? It's like, yeah, because there's like other things in this field that we're navigating in this like place that like there's so much more to learn and to understand. And even the idea of like what's going on online right now isn't actually debate. It's something a little bit different. And even people who are in the field of like debate coaching, stuff like that, are trying to like, okay, what exactly is going on, and like how can like I shift this to my curriculum, not necessarily my curriculum, but like what's actually happening and like how people are currently interacting.
Yeah, a great example of what you're talking about, Joe, is in the IT field. So before, there was a time when I just did debate coaching sort of on the side as a hobby, and my real job was I was in the IT field. And one of the things I noticed is that there were two types of people in those fields. I think a lot of people in the tech industry might recognize this. There are people who have a college degree in IT, and what they find is that within 5 years, everything they've learned is kind of outdated. Then there's people who didn't go to college, but were constantly getting new certifications. So they might be an MCSE, or they might get Cisco certification, or might have to re-up their original certifications about every 5 years, something like that. And so those people are constantly learning the way Joe's talking about. Whereas the people who spent 4 years learning this stuff, within 5 years, like, their education really isn't just worth a whole lot. And they might, because of their degree, end up being the bosses of those people who collect certifications or whatever, because they've become managers or whatever. IT is one of those weird fields where the people who work for you probably make more money than you do if you're a manager. And it's because of that continual learning over time and practical application that they're worth so much. Whereas having the college degree it just isn't worth as much in that field. And there are a lot of other fields like that too, where it is that practical knowledge and that sort of continuing education that makes the difference.
When you say IT, do you include computer science there?
No, that's why I specifically said IT degrees. So if you have a college degree in computer science, then you've learned several languages, and knowing that language is very useful across a longer time span. So computer science people tend to have better longevity in terms payback in their career fields than the people who got a major in IT.
I wanted to focus in on what Jill had said previously, because I think it was an interesting point. And I wanted to ask Debate Board his opinion on this. So, Joe, I think, maybe very rightly said that to have any system we're going to have is going to be discriminatory, but liberals should understand that if they are going to have a system that they think is equitable, that's going to involve discrimination as well. And he said, like, it just depends on what you want the system, the college admission system, the education system, to actually be doing. And so I'm curious, Debate Board, what your opinion is on this. I think I don't think you'd I don't think you disagree that the SAT is discriminatory in a way. You may disagree on how, in what way, but it's discriminatory in a way. But do you think that it's fair that if we changed the terms of the discrimination to instead benefit people who are like first-time college goers, right? Like right now we have the whole legacy program, which gives an advantage to people who just happen to be born to someone who went to college already. If we got rid of that, that would help people who are first-time college goers. If there are barriers we can get rid of so that non-English speakers could have a better shot, and then minority students as well, right? If we are discriminatory in a way that advantages them, is that necessarily worse in your mind than what we have now?
I don't think anybody disagrees that testing inherently is discriminatory, right? Mm-hmm. The basis of the discrimination is on merit in this case, right? Although folks will point to disparities in test scores as reflections of something else happening before the test is administered, right? So I don't think, though, that we should change college admissions to be a program of social justice. That our chief interest or priority in college admission should be achieving social justice. I think that because when we start lowering standards, right, we're going to create problematic mismatches between individuals and the colleges that they are admitted to, and that mismatch is a well-grounded effect that we see in college admissions, where low-achieving students for non-merit reasons are selected and admitted to highly competitive universities and colleges, and they drop out. And so this high dropout result of the mismatch problem is why I don't think we should transform our college admission systems from one based on merit to one prioritizing social justice. We'd be saying that diversity is so important to our schools and to broader society that lowering standards is a worthy price to pay. And if that's what you want to declare, then we ought to declare that, and we ought to be honest about acknowledging that. But I don't think that's a direction.
What I'm certainly not talking about decreasing, changing. I'm certainly not saying that we shouldn't have one based on merit. I'm just talking about, like, how do we judge that merit, and what counts as merit? Because something that apparently that counts as merit is the fact that your parents went to that school previously. Should we have legacy admissions? Start with that. I think that's a low bar here.
Oh, well, no. Merit is never evaluated using legacy. Admissions is evaluated using legacy, right? And I don't have a problem with legacy admissions.
Why not?
Why not? If a school wants to admit a son or daughter because the parents have been especially generous in contributing to that institution, or has had a distinguished career at that institution, I don't care.
No. Legacy is more than that. Legacy is just like having your parents having been there, right? Like not necessarily or parents or other family members having gone there.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of forms of legacy admissions, to include what I described. Right?
Okay, sure.
And if we want to narrow it down to just that one, why should debate board be admitted to MIT? Well, because both of his parents graduated from here. Oh, I don't care. What's the MIT gets to make its selections. They have a competitive selection process. They set aside slots for legacy. What's the harm?
What's the harm is that I mean, if you have this commitment to merit-based entries, then setting aside slots for legacy and the type of legacy that I described.
These institutions have clearly set aside. They clearly tell us they're setting aside slots for legacy admissions.
Yeah, so I get that they're admissions doing process it, but is it right?
Only based on merit. Well, it's right because they have their prerogative as an institution to do whatever the hell they want, right?
Okay. But yeah, obviously. Okay, great. Then we can. Yeah, sure. They have the prerogative to do lots of things.
No, I mean, but what's happening here is you're attempting to use the existence of legacy admissions, right, as a basis to say, well, we ought to either transform or significantly alter the merit system, right? And that's not an argument at all for doing anything to the merit system.
The only thing I'm trying to get, I haven't even gotten to the rest of the system. I was just talking about this one thing, legacy. Like if you're saying that merit is the way that we should be able discriminating, right, on the basis of merit, then we have the legacy system, which is clearly
non-merit based.
Non-merit based, exactly that, right? And so, if anything, it would seem like that would be the lowest of bars to clear to get rid of that. Right, and so that we would have more spots open for people who are merit-based. Let's say they are all white cis men, right? Every single one. We get rid of legacy spots, and only white cis men fill up those spots any which way because, hey, it turns out that they just had the merit. But like at the very least, then it would be a more honest system, correct? Right? I mean, according to your own objectives.
No, I don't think that that the existence of the legacy system, it says anything about the merit side of the house. Frankly, I don't care about the legacy admissions at public, not at public, but at private colleges and universities. I mean, this is something like 10% of the admission slots. I don't care about that. In those places where we're going to rely on merit to screen and select, right, then I think standardized testing is a far more effective approach than these other alternative methods that I talked about earlier, or that we've heard referred to during our discussion.
So do I understand you correctly? You're saying that people shouldn't be admitted only because of merit, right?
Well, no. So there's one prong in this, which says a private institution, right, can determine whatever its admissions policies is going to be. That's one, right? So if that institution wants to have a legacy admissions process, go ahead and let them. I don't think it's of course it's not based on merit. I don't think legacy suggests anything about the candidates at all, and consequently, we have private institutions who admit problematic students who drop out, or they cause disruption, they bring disrepute to the institution itself. That's not a very practical way of admitting students to college.
Debate board. I think this is like a really sad way of depicting things, because of the fact that when it comes to who has the power, the left or the right, like depending on that, you will either agree or disagree with it. Like right now we see a lot of conservative saying like we need to regulate like social media, and I feel like a lot of these things is like who has the power, who doesn't have the power, and that is trying to perpetuate themselves. So it's kind of sad because I feel like this legacy stuff is like kind of like example of that. Like I don't know, like I think that's just silly. Like nobody would like are you pro monarchy? So if you are pro monarchy, okay, if that's your case, and then you have a value case. But otherwise, like nobody is saying that certain things need to be like hereditary. You know, nobody is arguing that at this point anymore whatsoever. And I think
what do you
making
think I'm
a silly
arguing
point.
though? I'm lost on what you think I'm arguing. Why
No,
you think what you're talking about
you're
is
saying
analogous.
you're saying like, well, they come from good family, so they have good kids, and therefore they can be
No, I actually haven't
part
said
of the
anything like
university.
that at all.
Well, it's
I don't even know what you're
hereditary, right?
talking about. No.
It's hereditary, right? That's what you're
What are you
saying.
talking about? No, it's not at all what I'm saying. What I laid out are the factors that legacy admissions relies on. I didn't actually describe any sense that this was the correct way
or are you
or the right
against
way.
it? Are you against it or pro?
I'm ambivalent. I'm indifferent to it because I don't think it matters.
Well, because of the fact that it's a private, because it's like a private entity, right?
No, I don't think it matters because even in a private institution, it amounts to 10% or less of the slots, and they can expand or reduce the number of slots they have available on an at-will basis. So, to be frank, no, I don't care. I don't think it's harming anybody.
This is the thing that I was getting at, because the point is
it doesn't make it hereditary.
Like this is like, it doesn't matter. It's like either on the left or the right. It's like whatever they benefit, and then they are like, well, I'm actually not pro regulating this thing because it actually like advances my side or something along those lines. I feel you're doing that right now.
Doing what exactly?
I think
you're attributing a bunch of shit to me, but you're not actually saying.
Well, ambivalence. The implication of you being ambivalent would just mean that you support it, and it just seems like you're skirting away of just saying yes, I support this.
No, it means I'm actually indifferent and ambivalent towards
it. And indifference would be support, because we could recognize.
No, it's not. It's like saying no action is action. I mean, it's silly cliche.
We can recognize that these universities will do whatever they want, and a lot of them, especially the private ones, have been very apprehensive of reducing legacy. So in the current state, your ambivalence would be just in support of this thing.
No, you can ask me if I support it, and I tell you that I don't.
You said
support it.
And
I'm
you said
so.
It. Oh wait, so is it you don't support it, or are you ambivalent to it?
No, I'm ambivalent and indifferent to it. That doesn't mean that I support it. This tacit support bullshit that you're kind of going down here, that you're disguising as objectivity, is exactly that. It's bullshit. All right. So in private colleges and universities, if they have shown a reluctance to reduce legacy admissions, they're doing so out of their own pure interests. They have interests and they can pursue those as much as they want. My indifference to that doesn't mean that I support their decision making. It does, and in fact, I said earlier that I don't think it's a very worthwhile approach, right, to selecting for admission spots.
So then why don't you just say you don't support it then?
Because I support the institution's entitlement, right, to have a legacy component to their admission system as an
that's funny. Okay.
So is versus
no, it's not
odd.
funny. You're trying to pen me in on something here.
I'm not trying to pin you on anything. I'm just trying to follow your words, and your words betraying you. And I'm not the only person who's hearing the betraying of your words.
No, there's no betrayal of my words here.
Like, let's poll the audience. People who are in this panel right now. Do you feel like he's betraying what he's saying, Chinchilla?
Yeah, well, I was the person that was bringing it up, so I obviously agree with you, Joe Lewis. But yeah,
Drake's.
I thought so too, but I'm not sure whether he's trying to just make the point that this is basically private business and they can do whatever they want, even though I don't agree with this point, but maybe that's what he means.
Aiko?
I don't think he's betraying his words at all. I don't think his words are betraying him. I think he means what he says, which is to say he's indifferent. And if he's indifferent, that means he neither supports nor doesn't support the practice. However, I disagree with him because I do think it does harm, except for instances, which is what Debate Board was talking about at the beginning, when his assumption was that Prime meant people who were also being generous and contributing to, say, the general fund of the university, in which case that's money that then can be turned around and used for scholarships for other people who could get in either on merit or who would have difficulty getting to the university. And I think that itself could be a pretty good justification for some of those policies for at least some of the slots.
Was that a fair representation for?
Sure, I think I think it's a fair representation. It depends on what it is that you want to believe about legacy admissions.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
So
Okay.
I don't get the right. I wouldn't have actually mentioned merit in this conversation except for Prime had then referred to merit when he first started talking about legacy admissions here. So I'm interested to see where Prime is going to go with this as a.
Well, I mean, he asked you directly about legacy, and that's how we got here. And then he removed merit from that point and wanted
he
to
did
start there first.
after I pointed it out. Sure.
So tell me if I'm wrong, but if I understand you correctly, you're saying the general population doesn't have a say in what MIT wants to do. I would disagree with this and say that the government, the general society, has a say in how education looks like.
Can I just say I really feel like I have a third position on this stuff that I just don't want anyone to assume what my position is, because I'm not.
And before you,
yes,
and before you, because I want to hear what your position is.
Okay, yeah, sure.
The problem with Debate Board here is maybe what Joe is picking up is like what I have felt, but I interpret it differently. I feel like you aren't necessarily answering the question that I'm asking, and it's probably on me for being for not asking well enough. When I'm asking you about this, about like whether we should have legacy admission, I can acknowledge that it simply is the case, and private institutions under our legal framework in the United States have the right to do that. Okay, I can acknowledge that. I'm asking you, what would be ideal under your system if you could be a king for the day, and if it's true that you believe that metrics should be king, or sorry, not metrics, sorry, merits, excuse me. Merit should be king. Then in that system, would you have legacy? And legacy specifically, as I had previously defined it, being simply being born of a previous graduate. Would that be something that you would have in your system?
No, as I already said earlier, I don't think legacy admissions is a worthwhile approach to selecting the fill admission slots, right? However, I don't think that there should be any restriction on private institutions from including a legacy admissions component to their admissions policies. They ought to have, they are entitled to include that if that's how they want to choose to fill positions.
All right, fair enough.
I don't think I was unclear earlier when I said I don't think it was a worthwhile approach, but somehow that got lost.
Yeah.
The answer, the word "no" got lost in what you were saying, but it's clear now, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's.
Well, thanks for letting me clarify.
Yeah, sure. Let's go to Aiko, please.
Yeah. So here's what I mean by my third position. I do think merit should be king. I actually think the SAT is a good test. I think most AP tests, at least in subjects that I've taught before, which includes AP Lit, AP Government, and the reason. So I think they're good tests. I'm not, and I think that the problem is that people aren't prepared for those tests. I think that's the problem, is that there's a big disparity in terms of in the education field, Joe will recognize this word, the schema, right? Or the plural, the schemata that they have going into, even if you give them an SAT prep like class that they take for a semester or for a year, they're coming into it with a lack of prior knowledge that is like fundamentally going to fail them. And so it's not that the tests are bad, although some standardized tests are bad. It's that we're not doing a very good job of making sure that by the time they get to the test, they have a fair shot at showing their merit. And I think that's a big problem. But the reason I think we still need standardized tests is because when I'm not saying we don't overemphasize standardized tests, because I think we do. But I think the reason it needs to be part of the mix is because it's a sort of a way of error checking. Like if if differences in ways things are graded or subjectivity and way kids are being evaluated, you can kind of check that with standardization, because it's really hard at the end of the year. If your kids are not doing as well on tests as kids in other classes, you can ask yourself the question, well, why is that? And one of the ways I'd like to see more in education is a comparison of standardized testing from one year to the next, so that you're actually as evaluated as a teacher, not on where they are absolutely in terms of those standardized tests, but where they are relative to where they were in the previous year's tests, so that you can see rate of improvement. That's really what the teacher's job should be, is to take them from wherever they are and to help them improve. So to that extent,
go ahead, finish your point. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, to that extent, this is why I think standardized tests are necessary in the educational system. It's just that I don't think kids are prepared in prior years, in the earlier years, to be able to succeed later. And I think that difference often has to do with resources that they have at home. And
do you think the NEEP test already does that kind of cohort testing?
Which test?
The NEEP, or is it NEPA?
I've never dealt with that.
Yeah, I mean, test. So they're tested at like 3rd grade and I think 6th grade and and I think maybe to 8th grade as well.
We have different names for standardized tests in Texas.
I mean, Michigan it was MEEP, but I thought there was also the national equivalent as well. So there is some standardized testing, at least K through 8, right? That hits.
We have it, absolutely. We call it STAR here, and it's the same thing.
Right. But I think what you're saying is you're not actually taking on an individual basis, right, their performance at one grade and comparing it to their performance at the next grade, and then comparing against their cohort.
Right.
Progress,
yeah.
right?
There's not enough of that going on. Teachers should be evaluated on improvement, not on where they land. Absolutely.
Right. Whether or not teachers should be evaluated on that, I that's one thing that I've been arguing a lot for is that right, individual performance year over year on these standardized tests, and then comparing that performance against the larger cohort to actually evaluate properly student achievement. One of the barriers getting in the way, though, is just the fact that the standardized testing, the test itself, is evolving so rapidly that results from 2 years ago can't actually be used when they take another standard, when they take
they can be, but it's difficult to do so. But you can do it by cross comparing laterally and vertically, so that you can say, okay, well, we know that it's changed, but it's changed for everybody, so we can see how different cohorts responded to that change. But you're right, it's difficult. It makes it more complicated when you're constantly changing the test.
And it's also just a matter of time too. Well, I mean, like, I'm in Jersey. We test these kids way too much, man.
No, that I agree with. It shouldn't be constant. Yeah.
As somebody who like listen, like, May shot for every teacher in my state. It's shot. We can't teach anything. We can't teach anything leading up to May. We can't teach anything after May, because we have the NJSLA, and then if you're in grades 4 through 10, you have the ELA, which is coming up early. It's in September this year. It's like the 13th, I think, this year, around 13th or 14th, which is just the whole start of the month is bodied. Like,
I also think that teachers at the younger years should be paid more. Like, kindergarten teachers should be paid more than 5th grade, should be paid more than 9th grade. Yeah. Like, it should go like that.
And something that's really important too is just like the connection points. I think like one of the biggest failures of mathematics and why students are struggling with mathematics as hard as they are and why proficiency is so fucked up is that there hasn't been a really solid connectiveness of material across subjects. So something that I think, and the math teachers already know this and they're sniffing it now, thankfully. Like my whole generation got bodied in that, like it's very hard sometimes for students to connect, like, okay, why am I doing this now? Like, why does this now matter to what I was doing before? And how does before relate to the present? And that's something that math has struggled with, and the sciences too, generally. And some subjects have a bigger burden than others, where it's like, it's very easy in a history class to connect, like, okay, what you learned last year relates to this year, guys, because history. But for mathematics, it's like, okay, how does algebra relate to geometry? How does geometry relate to, and even in other subjects, where like, how does what you're doing in mathematics relate into other subject matters, which is something that is not only the onus of math teachers, but the onus of any teacher in a school that like has to like teach relating to that. And again, it's way better now. Like kids in 2022, they're way better than my 9/11 babies. We got kind of bodied, but
I don't know. I don't know. Go ahead, Chinchilla.
Yeah, I have more of like a general question overall, because I don't know about the American like education system a lot, because I'm not American whatsoever. But for me personally, I'm interested to hear about you guys. Like when it comes to the education, is it standardized in the sense of like the same like education processes that are happening in different schools, or is it like all the schools can have like a different like package or whatever? Like Joe Lewis, like I don't know if, because that is something that Prime brought up like earlier, that he wasn't like prepared when he came into college or whatever, or university. It was like he didn't have that math education, like but yeah, I don't know how that works within the US.
Yeah, I mean, like,
and I just want to be clear. Hey, I graduated that university, and then I went on. Well, much later.
Hey, I'm not shading you. I'm not shading you. Come on, man.
Oh my God, I know you're not. I'm just stating that. That I graduated that university, and then later on I went to get a master's degree. Right, so it's not like I couldn't do it. Like in that area, I hadn't been taught. Right, once I was taught, then I could do the thing. So I'm putting that out there.
Yeah, and I'm in music. They know the game. Like when this is true for any of my performance majors. They know exactly what happens. We go into the class, and then the professor looks at us, and it's like, oh fuck, here are the performance majors. They're just gonna skirt all the way through this. It's very apparent in schools of music. Just to give an example, for my clarinet teacher, when he went to, I think it's Trish, one of the ones that's affiliated with NYU, he just took one math class and one English class, and that's all he got for his entire 4 years. And even then, the teacher was like, "You just show up, just show up. Like we're not gonna hold you back on this nonsense. Just show up, do what you gotta do, and get out of here." But for other majors, like they can't do that. Like you can't just like you can go to a music performance major and go, yeah, I'm totally fine with just like hand waving you an A in algebra for college students. But for other majors, yeah, they can't get on that hook. But again, like that's because for performance schools, they're affiliated to other universities for like liberal arts shit. So like once you get the performance majors and the drama majors, they're only there because they need to be there due to requirements. They're not there because they want to be there. And then like if you fail a performance student, oh, you're a brave soul. It's no different than like football coaches, like teachers being bold football players.
But can you entertain my questions? Like the pre-education to go to college or like university, is that so different when it comes to like all these different like schools and that kind of stuff? Is it so different within the US? And do you think there needs to be like I'm not talking about standardized testing, but I'm more talking about standardized like education.
Yeah.
So,
Well, what we see is that like schools are built. It sounds like such a cop out, but schools are built drastically different. Like the education that Prime had versus the education that I have versus the education that Aiko had, and like the application of these things is totally different. And then we don't really see those consequences until you're in the educational environment interfacing with these other students. And then by the time that happens, it might even be too late. Where like I've had like it's really funny. The way that the Turing test that some musicians do now that's turned into a meme is just asking how many scales there are. And you'll have a whole section of students who will answer with impunity 24 when the actual answer is 30. And then like when they start explaining why it's 24, it's just pure cope. So it's like and then what happens is like in practice, like both answers are correct. 24 and 30 are technically both correct answers, but the problem is how it applies to the material is different. When it comes to testing and stuff like that, and like educational attainment, states are able to make their own guidelines around that. For example, if you're in Florida, you're not going out of there with a comprehensive sex education curriculum because it doesn't exist. They don't have sexuality standards. So like if you're coming out of Florida trying to learn about sex, you're more likely to find a Floridian who's like a little weird on pronouns and gender than you are, say, like a New Jerseyan or a New Yorker. Because it's like within our curriculum to learn about sex education.
So like the scales, like the scales thing. My pet peeve is in our history standards, and it always changes year to year, and I never know what it's going to be. One of the questions is, when does modernity start? You can't answer that question, but there's always a definite answer, and it always kind of shifts around. I have an answer in my mind, but it's never what's on the state curriculum
or even like required materials.
Yeah.
Like there's people who like unironically think that Martin Luther King only did one sermon, and it's just like, oh
yeah,
no,
the Sermon on the Mount. Everyone knows that. Yeah, sure.
And again, like, and the thing is that like these gaps exist for a variety of reasons, and like obviously, like dogging on it now is funny, but at the same time, you're just like, damn, like it's really like that. And then you never know. Like that's even the thing in like to get to the IT example. Like one of the things that a lot of the music tech students started having a problem with is like the whole just like DOS war, where like you would have like a whole sect of music tech students that had no idea how to use Ableton. And then they're like, oh, that's because we use whatever we had in class and our teacher didn't care. And it's just like, oh no. Or even just the operating system could influence what you're experiencing. Because I got like, listen, when I was in school, I got bodied. Because I was like, yeah, I know video editing. And then I'm like, oh no, all of these are Windows machines. Do you mean to tell me? And it's like, yeah, we use Premiere. And I'm like, oh my God, why? And then every project was, you have to do this through Premiere. And it's like, but I pay for Final Cut. Why can't I do this in Final Cut? But yeah, to answer your question, Chinchilla, like it's kind of a Wild West with some concentration. But
yeah, thank you, because that answered like a lot of stuff for me, because of the fact that if you have like different educations before you go to university, it complicates a lot of stuff. So yeah, and maybe you should find some standardization in that in the first place, and then you can talk about testing. But if you don't do that standardization in the first place, then it's like the standardization overall is like, yeah, it might work in some way, in some shape, but it's like you still don't know when it comes to having it, like you're the director of like the university, you don't know who is coming in at that point, because you know they are educated on some fronts, and sometimes it's like because of the fact that the school might be rich or something along those lines, or they know what they are being taught for or being tested for and that kind of stuff. So then they are manipulating the system and that kind of stuff. But it's like it should be equal in some sense, that should be known what you need to teach the kids, right? And that seems like a major issue there. So
well, I mean,
yeah.
Here's like another musical example. Some people might know what I'm talking about. This might go over some people's heads, but we'll see what happens. When I was going through my musical development, I learned movable do, and I learned movable do from when I first started when I was like 5 or 6, all the way through high school, all the way through county, and then when I went to take the placement test for ear training, and I sped run through that shit. And then I sit down with the director of choral studies, and he's like, well, we're going to put you in music foundations. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what did you say to me? And it was like, yeah, you did really well on the music theory, but your sight singing wasn't quite up to snuff. And it's like, and he's like, the problem was his movable do stuff. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So I had to go through music foundations all through sight singing 1, 2, 3, and 4, just because I didn't know fixed do. And like, and then I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, and I learned it through public school. I learned it through teaching. And then it's like, damn, that's like a failure of the system. And then I just gotta pay. I gotta pay through that nonsense. And despite the fact that, like, sorry, go for it.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to get back to the topic. It's okay. And we have a new person here, Isle. Thanks for being here. But I wanted to get back to the topic in terms of like what should we discriminate against, right? Because you had a really good idea, and we didn't get anywhere with it. I asked that question to our friend DebateBoard, and that went off the rails very quickly. No, I'm not complaining at DebateBoard, but I want to understand, like, do the rest of you agree? Joe said that any system we create is going to be discriminatory, and a equitable system that liberals at least would think would equitable would be one that would certainly discriminate just in a different way. Do you think that that's okay? That we should be, that there are, even though it's discrimination, that there are more equitable, fair ways, or more just ways, maybe that's the word I should be using, more just ways to discriminate within our education system?
It stands to reason that it must be that way. You need to have academic standards, so therefore everyone who can't meet those standards are being discriminated against because they will be kicked out. You have policies of conduct, and so people who can't meet those policies of conduct will be discriminated against and they'll be kicked out. You have administration cost and fiat that, they're the ones who have, the big bureaucratic positions in the college, and they make the rules and, run the things that they are in charge of by fiat most of the time. And so if you can't meet those standards, they're going to discriminate against you for whatever the reasons they say. They don't want you there, and then you're going to be kicked out. So, I mean, no matter how you run the college, unless it's just total anarchy where you can do literally anything for 4 years and then just get a degree no matter what you do, like, there's going to be some discrimination there. Now, I think that if we follow the laws like Title IX and Title and all those, the civil rights law that have been, that are federal law and they're placed over the whole country, I think as long as you're, not discriminating against like race, religion, sexual orientation, in regards to admissions, I think that you're pretty good to do whatever you want, especially if you're a private school. If you're a public school, I think there's more scrutiny on to you to be more fair in the ways you operate.
So why is that? Why is that when you are a private school versus like a public school, you are less to be like scrutinized. Like, can you explain me that?
Yes, because the public schools are directly funded by the state of they happen to be hosted in, or by the federal government directly.
Yeah,
And with
I
that,
think that's no, but I think that's an interesting statement that you made there because of the fact that it's about the kids, right? It's about the kids, and they need to have a certain level of education, and you need to have like a certain level of education that the kids need to have to participate within the system to be successful. Overall, I think that private schools within the US like outperform like public schools. I heard something along those lines, but I'm not quite sure. But that being said, like I think you need to have like standards when it comes to what you educate the kids on. That being said, like I went to a Catholic school, but that was just in like the pause breaks. We had like readings from the testaments and that kind of shit. So it wasn't like that immersive to being a Catholic. So it wasn't that extreme, but yeah, you can have like spaces where you do your religious education if as a private school. But overall, I think that when it comes to your curriculum, it should be the same as like a public school. Wouldn't you think so?
no,
Why not?
because once again, it's a private school. As long as they achieve the standards, which I guess are the standardizations to
So you agree with me?
to get and retain accreditation for the multiple majors that they're going to be offering, so that the students after their 4 years or even their 2 years, if they just want an associate's degree, can get their degree and then graduate. I think that should be the bare standard, accreditation. But once you've received accreditation, you should be allowed to have the academic freedom and rigor to offer the courses and the equipment that you're able to do. So I think that's about academic freedom, and I think since it's a private school, I think that there's an air of mystique and prestige and particularity that people enjoy. I think that's one of the reasons why they're like so important. Like, going to Harvard, going to Yale, going to Brown, going to I forgot what those are, like Ivy League Ivy League schools. There are more Ivy League schools, but I just forget them because they're not as well. They are famous, but I just can't name them because I didn't go to any of them. But like those have prestige and weight because they're long storied. They have very competitive processes to try and get in, and once you get in, you're practically set up for life because of I guess the branding and the weight that those degrees carry. Even if, like, I had a classmate who got into Brown because she decided to go into take the hospitality major, and so she got like a scholarship to go to Brown for like being a restaurateur or like a hotel like manager type thing, which I didn't even know you could do until she got that scholarship and got in for that school, and that's attached to Brown. So I thought that was crazy, and I was really proud of her. But that's what you can do when you're like just a really well-known famous school. You can have like crazy majors and schools attached to your university if you have the money and funds for people that want to go and spend their money and time there.
I think I don't necessarily disagree with you when it comes to like the end of the road when it comes to education, like university and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to like lower education, like middle school or whatever you guys want to call it, when it comes to kids, like basically there you should have some sort of like standardization when it comes to like education overall, because the fact that people are like going from that point to B, right? And they're going from A to B, and they are being tested, and they being tested. Like, I think overall that's more interesting point when it comes to like university. What you are saying at that point, people are like going to a certain specific like area that they are interested in, and they should be like 100% more tested on their merits. What you are saying, I agree with that. So, but when it comes to people that are from a lower age, like from the age of 4 until the age of like 15 or something along those lines, I don't know where the cutoff line is. There should be like some sort of like standardized way of how to educate those kids. But yeah, I don't know how it works in the US, but maybe Joe Lewis knows more about it. But yeah, whatever.
Well, in the U.S., each of the 50 states have their own Department of Education, where they themselves get to set the standards for the teaching parameters for the state.
And yeah, that's all fine and all, but that being said, like, would it be like greater if there's overall like standard over there?
I mean, I hear Chinchilla. I hear your appeal to this standardized. I think what you're really trying to suggest is that there ought to be a standardized set of knowledge that needs to be imparted upon students between the ages of X and Y, right? Okay, and you know, the U.S. has a very different foundational principle than European countries, and there is not a groundswell of support to have a nationwide approach to educating students.
This is the thing that I always heard. This is the thing that I always heard. Oh, we got a complicated history. We got a complicated history, and therefore we cannot do this thing.
Just shut up for a second.
It's dumb.
We have a nation.
You're being
dumb.
A
nation that is what you have 11 million people or 17 million people in the Netherlands, right? Very easy to argue that a big city ought to have
11 million.
A standardized approach to teaching students. We have a national population of 350 million people spanning 4 million square miles. Okay, so what is problematic in your approach is that you're trying to take something that you think is working well in the Netherlands and trying to scale it up to something the size of the United States in a country where there's rightly so, a broad mistrust of the national government, and that the states are not willing to turn over the system of education to technocrats and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Okay,
yeah.
So while it's great in theory. It's great in theory that this might work. That's all. It works in the abstract only. Okay.
No, but this is the thing. You guys are always saying like, well, this is the theory, and well, the US is just different. It doesn't work here because it's different, and we are just different, and it doesn't work here. And this is
hold on a second. We can take this argument Debateboard is making seriously, but we can then say, okay, but in America the states still broadly control education. So there are plenty of states that are as small or smaller than that country, and you could say, well, New Mexico can adopt that because they don't have a 330 million person population, and or Arizona could do it, or even a state as large as say Pennsylvania could try it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have we don't have a federalized education system. We have certain standards that the federal government expects states to meet, but states all have different approaches to how they can meet those standards.
And I think that's fine, because I think that since all 50 states have their own equal weight in this constitutional republic, they have the right to try and meet the standards as best as they will and in the way that they want. And so I think that, and even like schools before that, like to Chinchilla's point, I think schools to that, in each state have to get accreditation from the state. So especially public schools have to get accreditation from the state. Private and religious schools, I believe, also have to get accreditation from the state to actually be recognized as a school that you can actually go to. It just so happens that, like was said on the closed panel, like religious schools will just claim a religious exemption because they have religious practices and religious doctrines that they want to impart to the students.
No, but this is like a great point that you bring up, because this is something that I'd like to hear, because of the fact that something that was brought up earlier by Prime is that certain types of math wasn't taught by the teachers to him, but there is some sort of accreditation when it comes to teaching like certain stuff and that kind of stuff, and I think that's great. Overall, I think that when it comes to like educating people and that kind of stuff, like it doesn't have to be like the same for 300 million people or something, like 320, or was it that 350? But I would just advocate overall that it would be like a necessity for like the US overall, when you have these people going from like state to other states, to have some sort of standardized system, because of the fact that
I disagree.
their universities overall like accept anybody from any states whatsoever. So you need to have some standardization.
I disagree.
And that would benefit for the universities as well.
I disagree.
Right?
I disagree, because the
that
states
doesn't benefit the universities.
No, because the states are sovereign in the fact that they have their own equalness in.
Yeah, they can be sovereign, but that being said, like it would be beneficial to have some sort of standardization. They can still be sovereign in some situations.
No, because if one state wants to teach X and Y way, and you come from state 3, right? 3. And you want, and your state has taught you history differently, you can't expect to go to this other state that has a different standard of teaching history. And
I think that overall, when you want to apply for Harvard, overall, that's like the creme de la creme, right? You as a school should aim for your kids to be able to apply for Harvard or for some other like high ed schools. So that's the standardization that you should aim for as like a school, right? So I think
not
why not?
Are like Harvard, and so there might be other schools that people might want to do.
So it's just, so you wanna educate your kids to aim for a lower school than Harvard? Is that your point?
No, because
we ought not to be pursuing it.
Yeah, people shouldn't pursue Harvard, one, because there are different things and different values people might have that would preclude them to not pick Harvard. Like if you, like you said, like you were Catholic, you went to a Catholic school, I went to a Catholic school, so I ended up going to Boston College, which was a Catholic college as well. Not necessarily because I felt that I needed to have a Catholic college, but
sure.
The campus was good, the culture was good, probably because I was Catholic, so I found the culture was good as well. So that's probably one of the reasons why subconsciously I chose it, but that wasn't necessarily an explicit goal I had. And so you might just might be like the actual college, the campus culture. It could be the specific major that you want. It could be the fact that you want to go away from your state, or you might want to be in your state, but you want to go to a dorm life instead of commuting. There are multiple factors that might make it so you don't want Harvard as your end goal. And so as long as the high school is able to get you to a post-secondary level of education, however the state that school is in got accredited for to do so, then I think that's fine. Then from what your knowledge is and what you've gotten as a junior, because that's when we first send our applications is junior year of high school. I'm not sure how it is in the Netherlands, but that's when you first start applying and taking the standardized test to see if you test into a school. And then after those first initial rounds, then you have first semester of senior year, and that's usually when you get back your acceptances, and then you finish out the year. And then when you finish out the year on the condition that you actually pass senior year and you get an acceptance letter, then you matriculate into that college that you decided to your security deposit
I wanted
for once you got your acceptance.
I wanted to let in debate board and Aiko and everyone else and Mordecai who's here. Yeah, debate board, help us recenter.
Well, so as we were talking about earlier, a merit-based approach, right? Using merit, using tools that that are effective at predicting future performance in college, right? So if we're not going to use merit and we're going to now use principles of social justice to correct real or perceived inequities in society, what are these other approaches, right? So I keep hearing, we don't want to fixate on merit. Merit seems to have these adverse effects, or they don't help mitigate or course correct previous real or perceived ills. So what are these other approaches to as alternatives to merit that we would use?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out what social justice means in this context, because the second
listen,
or third, I don't know, man.
I'm not one of those people that wants to get rid of it. I think I was pretty clear about that. But I do want to apply the principles of social justice. I just want to do it at a much earlier age so that we can then create the merit that allows people to do well on these tests and make it through college and succeed and graduate and all of that. So for me, it's not about getting rid of merit-based systems, and it's not about even getting rid of standardized tests. Although I do agree with Joe that like we've gone too far, like we need to pare it back a little bit. But I think that instead of getting rid of mechanisms that are supposed to judge merit, I think what we need to do is create the merit in more people so that the tests don't wind up having disparate outcomes on different groups. I think it's unacceptable. Look, I'm not going to call it, I won't call it racism if that triggers anybody, but I will say that there are disparate outcomes over ethnicity and race that need to be corrected, not by adding points to people's scores, not by taking tests away, not by making them easier, but by giving the people the preparation that will cause those disparate outcomes to be mitigated. To me, that's the solution.
Yeah, and I guess I'll go if you want to do the race part, I'll do the race part because people love it when I talk about this shit. It's like, look, at the end of the day, Black people are poor, and the last thing that we need to do when it comes to educational attainment is to make them more poor educationally. So like, I don't want to touch shit when it comes to standards, but I do want to recognize that not every single individual in the system is going to have the tools in order to reach those standards. So like, I'm with it on Aiko, where you just gotta start sooner. Like, you gotta recognize that like there's just things that you need to do at the public school level when it comes to college readiness, and you're gonna have to spend a lot more attention on certain groups of your student body, and that's gonna make a lot of people uncomfortable because it's gonna feel like they're overtly targeting individuals. But that's what I mean about discrimination. Like, just because we're giving a group of individuals a special attention because we recognize how far behind they are doesn't mean that these other individuals aren't going to be able to take their tests and have their tutors. Like, all these things are gonna
before, and Mordecai, I'm gonna I'll let you jump in because I want to hear what you have to say. But this is my problem with this argument. So I didn't realize you simply meant, like, by discriminatory you meant like giving special attention to people earlier. Like, I'm all about investing into education. Like, I love the idea on all levels, on every single level. Let's do it. You won't find any argument from here, right? Like, the only argument is going to be how much, and I'm going to put a number higher than you're going to put out, right? That's how I roll. However, at this moment, that ain't happening. That's not going to happen. It's nowhere near happening. What is happening is what I said previously during this conversation, is that we are currently running a national experiment in which we are getting rid of the SATs and the ACT, right? colleges, universities are going through either a test blind or a test optional scheme for college admissions. I'm saying that these tests have been yet another barrier to keep out groups of individuals who have been disadvantaged. Since right now, that seems to be the easiest path to get people in, right? To get more people in. Now, it's not. I agree with you all that there are certain individuals who are just so far behind. There's like literally no way they're going to be able to succeed whatsoever. However, I also believe that, just as myself in my own experience, that you can be behind, but get help within the university, and then go on to succeed, right? Go on to, and by that I mean graduate, and go on from there. Like that's actually a possibility. But like it seems like this conversation, it's like, well, like you're gonna go to these colleges and you're gonna fail because you're not properly prepared, right? Like, and that's just kind of like a fait accompli, right? Like this is definitely going to happen, rather than saying, what, okay, well, have students who might need a little extra help. Why don't we just give them extra help? Why don't we give them make sure that if they need remedial classes in some areas, make sure that they get directed to those, and let them know there's no shame in doing that, certainly. Get them to those classes so they're up to snuff and so they can spend the rest of their time succeeding. If they need help because they don't have a network at home, right, a support network, let's give them that support network. There's all kinds of ways that you can help these people succeed, and not necessarily like rely on this test to further entrench levels of discrimination that we see based on income. You want to?
I got a grenade. I'm curious if Iko wants to play with my grenade that I'll throw.
Okay.
I will, but let me just say very quickly, I agreed with everything until you got to your very last sentence, because I still want to keep the test. But I do also agree that we should help at all levels, but we should also not fool ourselves. We know that there's an ROI here, right? We know that the amount of effort that you put in at the pre-K through 5th grade level is at each level is going to be the return on investment is going to be much higher. And with each year that you go up, your ROI goes down. It's still positive. That is to say, helping them still makes a difference, and therefore we should do it. But we also need to understand that when we have limited resources, getting the biggest ROI is going to make the biggest difference. So you don't give up on kids when they get older, but by focusing on kids when they're younger, you make fewer of those people that are going to need help at the older ages.
I agree, but like the thing on the table now is college, right? Because that's right now our easiest path. It is the least effective path. I would agree with everyone here on that, but it's the path that's on the table here. Okay, let's hear Waterkai. The Waterkai, then debate board, and then we have a grenade that apparently,
and then the bomb.
I actually wanted the grenade to come first. I want to see where that goes.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I'd like to directly.
Okay, well, I wanted to say something real quick.
Okay. So go ahead, debate board, if you want to directly reply to me.
So I don't think that standardized testing is as large a barrier or as significant a barrier as you are considering it to be. I'm wondering how you're evaluating or how you're assessing that. What sorts of metrics or qualitative factors or criteria that you're using. But I would think that advocates of equity, if we're going to use equity in this, but advocates of equity should want colleges to rely more and not less on standardized test scores. And the reason for that is when you start mixing in essays or extracurricular activities or other subjective considerations, you have then the opportunity for a large variety of biases to enter the picture, right? You have admissions officers who are now looking at, well, who made that trip to Africa? Who played the bassoon? Who was able to hire that essay coach? These are all factors that have nothing to do with actual student achievement in the classroom. And the more we deviate from actual achievement in the classroom, right, the more opportunity for admissions officers to be biased against specific groups on whether it's sex or skin color, political views, right? You have essays now that that you have to require DEI components to. And if you're not sufficiently writing to these components, you can be scored lower. So in other words, if top colleges made their admissions decisions purely on the basis of standardized test scores, I think there would be more lower income students at the top schools and not fewer. And we can look at some research by this guy at Harvard, last name is Chetty. I just call him Chet, that shows that, high income students are overrepresented at top colleges where these non-merit based decisions are being made. And I think we need to get rid of these non-merit based decisions like essays and extracurricular activities to level that playing field for lower income students.
So,
and I also wanted to respond to Prime too.
My response to you is that I would agree with what Joe said at the start when he first came in. Is that like we should be relying more on school scores, like high school scores, grades.
Yeah, combination GPA and standardized test scores is I think where I landed too.
Without the SAT course, like I think if I think that's a fair point you're bringing up in terms of the extracurriculars and how that could be a problem too. But yeah. Focus more on the grades. Focus more on the GPA. On that, then we would have a more inclusive system. In fact, we're seeing that University of Chicago, got rid of SAT in 2018, long before the pandemic, and they are very happy with where they've ended up in terms of the mix of individuals. Like the diversity increased once they got rid of all that. That's what happened. As soon as they stopped relying on that, the diversity increased. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens in 2025 when those people start graduating from those institutions, right? And hopefully they are graduating at a high rate from those institutions.
2022. Oh, for the University of Chicago.
Did they start in 2018?
Yeah, 2018.
Oh, that was okay. University of Chicago. Interestingly, MIT has returned. They're reintroducing the SAT, ACT requirement. So some of these institutions are now going back to that. But I'll give the floor back.
No, yeah,
I wanted to respond as well.
Go ahead.
So, Prime, I agree with you that we need to, even at schools, be able to have places where students can go, even if they are on the very borderlines of acceptance, so that they don't flunk out of school and fall into despair of student debt slavery. The thing is, like I said, I went to Boston College, which was a Jesuit college, and they actually had that. They had ones for women, they had ones for students of color. I think what happens is that on certain campuses, I think lots of campuses do have these. I think it's just the fact that you have to be savvy enough to actually go to your school administration and ask them where on campus those offices are, and then actually go down to where those offices are and let yourself know.
Be savvy. You shouldn't have to be
exactly.
savvy.
I know that's a failing of the schools, is that people when you get there for orientation day, they'll say, oh yeah, we have this place, that place to help you, blah 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 blah, but no one ever really takes you there. And then they just go to the next spot on the tour that they want because it's the fanciest spot. So I think that I think students students would benefit if on those tours and orientations they actually took you to the places that were there to help you, instead of just the fanciest shiny tourist traps of the campuses. But
I think you got to go farther. I think you got to go way farther. You have to not only make sure that these students know that these things exist, but you have to do the exact same thing that these fraternities and sororities do, is harass these students in using these services and participating in these things. It's not as easy. I've seen so many students just fail, and there's no intervention. There's zero intervention service. Zero, they all exist. All those ideas of intervention programs and making sure the students fail. And it's look, if a student is failing, they're already at a point of crisis. And if the student's at a point of crisis, they're not going to be willingly reaching out to places and points of crisis. You got to harass them to make sure that they exist. And like harassment sounds like, oh, this makes me uncomfortable. It's like tough shit. Snowflake, but like you gotta go to their class. You gotta pull them out. You gotta pull them out during lunch. You gotta pull them out during study hall. You gotta call their parents. You gotta follow up with their parents. You gotta like because again, like schools don't want to see students fail. And time again, like the onus of the failure lies on the teacher of like, well, like and you don't want to put a teacher in that position of like, do I fail this kid or give them a D? And like, is then like that's gonna compound in other ways.
Every college has a writing lab. If a freshman from day one, just every time they get a paper, they just go to they won't write the paper for you. They'll just look at your paper and tell you what's wrong with it and hand it back to you. It's almost as if you got a grade, but instead of from a professor, it's from them. But you get to do a mulligan, and you can give that paper to the writing lab as many times as you want until they tell you, okay, it's acceptable now. If students do just that, the rates of success go way up. But a lot of kids on college campuses, amazingly, don't even know about it. They don't even know it exists.
Yeah, my
English professor, she was the head of the writing lab, and what she made us do was that we needed at least, before we turn in that paper, it had to be signed off by the member of the writing lab at least 3 times before submitting it. And then the thing was that she was a savage. She didn't give a fuck because like the thing is that like sometimes you would get the trap because some students would lie and just make up signatures. And she would be like, all of those students who are in their writing lab are also part of the master's program. So they're all there because of me. They're my employees. So if you don't do this, I'm gonna know.
High schools need those too.
Yeah.
And the writing labs need to exist in high schools.
Yeah, like you gotta like, and the thing is, for some students, they may not need the services for a different way. And then like, and that was me, and I was a cocky piece of shit. And then she was like, okay, you get to write all of your papers in ePrime now. Because you said you don't need these services, so now just for you, I'm going to make sure you're busy. And if you guys know anything about ePrime and writing the class again was, to be very clear, it was persuasive writing, and then she made me write all my papers in ePrime. That is bullshit. But again, it was a challenge because she recognized like, okay, this music performance student isn't going to take my class seriously, so I'm going to do something to make sure he takes it seriously with all these other kids. But I don't regret it. Like she was
detecting an undercurrent here, talking about student responsibility, and I'm finding some irony in this. And for months, listening to participants on Prime's panels talk about how kids are dumb as fuck. Kids have no sense of responsibility, no self-accountability, lack discipline, lack organization. All these kinds of things, right? And yet, when we start talking about performance on standardized tests, we start talking about everything except, right? And so, Joe, I'm really glad you brought this up, right? You got to kick the student in the ass. You got to compel them through a variety of different tools and approaches, right, to arrive at school, to perform in school. This is why I love extracurricular activities like sports, because you can then engage the coaching staff on getting these kids to get into school, to do the schoolwork, to academically achieve if they want to participate and achieve, whether it's in the band room or on the soccer field. There's a huge component here that has to do with student responsibility that I think we're overlooking as we talk about standardized testing.
But then that's interesting because then didn't you mention the idea of like extracurriculars not counting to a degree? Like was that your language that you used?
Yeah, because I think in terms of so I think participation in extracurricular activities has a strong positive effect on a student's academic achievement in K through 12. Now, whether or not then that participation ought to be used as a way to distinguish one college applicant from another applicant, I don't think extracurriculars should be a primary or overriding factor at all. It shouldn't be one of these so-called positive factors. Again, because you do.
Well, hold on a second. So if I have a student who is made it to the semifinals of NSDA nationals, like one of the top debaters in the country. Like, you don't think that should be a consideration?
No, because I think there's a sizable component of students out there that have zero access to that type of participation.
So, in talking about this access, this is the point I wanted to get to. For all the schools that are underperforming, why can't the government subsidize the schools to get every school on par and get them the same access to every program and everything that's involved for even better schools? To give all these people a chance to get to where they need to get to.
Have the money.
Exactly. There you go.
Well, I mean, you want
exactly. I mean, we've spent decades increasing the amount of K through 12 education by billions in the United States,
and we still have a deficit. We still underfund schools. We still underfund schools.
Well, so
by billions of dollars.
Yes, and what can fix that is government subsidization.
Well, we can argue that we underfund, but of course that then puts the onus on you to tell us, well, what is the right level of spending that's going to achieve these results that you think increasing spending is going to? Because we see, for example, we see school districts across the United States who, I think Kansas City was a great example of this, who through a court decision, right, is now the state is now required to give Kansas City or St. Louis schools tons and tons of cash. And what these schools do, they built Olympic-size, swimming pools inside the schools, right? So while I want to hear about ideas to increase resources schools, we also need to recognize that we've been increasing at not a slow rate. The amount of money being pumped into K through 12 and student achievement is still decreasing. It's not even remaining static.
But we're still at a deficit despite all of this funding. That's the point. Like every year, schools are underfunded by billions of dollars, despite all of the concentrated funding at the state level. The biggest problem is that the federal
underfunded compared to what? Like,
what do you mean compared to what? Compared to the amount,
an abstract number. What do you
every year, public schools are underfunded. They've been underfunded for a significant amount of time.
This
is from the Department of Education. I don't know what you're looking for. The Department of Education tracks the funding. What do you want? What are you looking for? Let me help me.
Okay.
What are you looking
for? When I say that I'm underfunded in my job, that means I'm getting paid X, but I think I should be paid Y. Okay. So what is the thing that Y is when it comes to education spending that says, or that we point to and say, see, public education is underfunded? How do we know it's underfunded?
Don't we know that because a lot of good teachers are quitting because they don't get enough salary?
We can see that's one aspect. The consequences of teacher salaries. It's the amount. It's the funding. It's the funding gap per pupil that we're talking about here.
Okay,
so there's an average. There is an average cost per state, per student, and it varies from each individual state. And by and large, across all 50 states, every state is underfunded in some capacity. The overall underfunding is in the billions of dollars. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 billion. It's in like the hundreds of billions.
So you appeal to in every state there's an average per pupil spending amount? Is that what you're talking about?
Every state has a funding gap per pupil. Yes.
Okay, so so for example, in New Jersey, where you're at, explain the gap. What is actually appropriated or authorized to spend, and what should be spent that would then reveal this gap?
Let's say at PrimeCayes state, the state of PrimeCayes, the average cost per pupil is $8,000. And then that $8,000 is based on a bunch of factors, right? And I don't have them off the top of my head. We're gonna rip. We're gonna rip on that. And then that cost. The question is that cost per pupil being met? And the answer is, for a lot of states, I think for all 50 states, including DC, the answer is no. That despite this average cost per pupil, that is not being met for a variety of reasons. And I'm saying that cost per pupil is going to add up to the point of billions of dollars, and that leads to the underfunding of public schools. And and that's just one aspect of it. There's underfunding in a bunch of different areas. There's underfunding at the per pupil level. There's underfunding at the infrastructure level. There's underfunding at the curriculum level. Schools in America are underfunded. Like, this is just a fact. I don't know exactly what you're looking for.
Well, usually,
And-